Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. I am joined today with a very special guest. He's been covering the Bulls for a long time. I think it's actually safe to call him a Bulls historian by this point. You know him as the Bulls beat writer for NBC Sports Chicago, as well as the co-host for the Bulls Talk podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago. Casey, always great to have you on, my man, and appreciate you making the time.
Thank you for having me again, Jamal. Appreciate it.
Casey, the last time I had you on, it was shortly after the Bulls were eliminated from the playoffs. How was the offseason? Busy for you? Were you able to take any time off before heading into this new season?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you always have the downtime to recharge the batteries. I was actually talking to somebody in the organization. It was the first kind of normal rhythm off season since the pandemic, obviously, so free agency in July, summer league in July, and then they obviously made their moves pretty quickly. So August and September were pretty light months.
Well, and it was kind of we can probably talk about that. I wouldn't say it's underwhelming off season, but a bit of a quiet off season for the Bulls compared to last year too. Just not as many transactions. There's just things were kind of up in the air with Lonzo Ball and his status, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I was kind of feeling the same way, which was good for me since I had a new baby, to not be able to focus so much on the channel. But let's talk about the Bulls. One game under their belt, win over Miami, which was a pretty big one considering the circumstances of no Zach Levine. Another game tonight against the Wizards, follow up by yet another game tomorrow night for the home opener against the Cavs. I know we got one game completed, so maybe this is probably a better question before the season starts, but how are you feeling about this upcoming season? Expectations for the team, storylines you're looking forward to covering, all of that?
Yeah, I think they're going to be solid. Obviously, health, like all teams, will be a storyline, and it's not off to the best of starts with the Lonzo and Zach situations. But I have them, a little bit under last year. I predict them to go 44-38. I think predictions are pretty superfluous because you're just guessing. But I'm not probably as down on this team as some people. I recognize on paper the East has improved, but to me, that's on paper. You got to go out on the court and do it. And I do feel like the organization's attempt to have some continuity and then add some margin signings was a good strategy. I know a lot of people are in the mind disagree with that. I personally think the Dragic and Drummond signings were very strong, and I think obviously both have played well through the preseason and just in one game. So we'll see how that plays out over time. And then people have said it's an underwhelming off season, but they obviously did their first order of business, which was re-sign Zach Levine, and that's not a small thing, especially there was chatter out there that, it was max or bust, and that's what he got. So, we'll see. But I've got him at 44-38, seventh place. I think they'll win a play-in game and officially qualify for the playoffs. And then I do not see them getting out of a first-round matchup. I think the East, the top of it at least, is just in a different class than the Bulls.
Yeah, it's a much more stacked Eastern Conference than we've ever seen in a long time, even more so than last year. I did want to talk about Zach Levine because, obviously we learned pretty unexpected, at least in my opinion anyway, that he was going to miss the season opener due to left knee management / injury management, which from what I understand is different from load management. It's still a new one to me. I don't think I've ever come across that one before. And of course, now we know, obviously, he's going to miss the game tonight against the Wizards. And I have to ask this question because I saw a lot of Bulls fans on Twitter, including myself, frustrated by how the communication on this went down, because we kept hearing from Zach in training camp and preseason that he feels great. Played in the preseason. He was a bit rusty, but never said anything about the knee bothering him. Had a whole week off of games before, the regular season. Then it was announced that, he's going to be questionable for the opener. I think that was actually you that announced that first. And that was the day before the game, and the day of the game, misses it. Now he's going to miss this next one. And I think what compounded the frustration for Bulls fans was the fact that Zach in pregame, and based on what he said again throughout this preseason, was that he felt great. But then Billy Donovan in the pregame said that he'll probably be, or that maybe he's experiencing some soreness, discomfort, because the last few practices leading up to the opener were pretty intense. I guess it just seems like the Bulls are kind of dropping the ball here with how this has been communicated, not very transparent at all. They were already very vague with what was going on with Lonzo over the offseason. What exactly is going on with Zach right now? Do you think there is actually something wrong or more serious than maybe they're letting on to?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I don't have the definitive answer on that, but certainly my antenna is up on that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're surprised, the beat crew is surprised as well. I don't think anybody saw that coming when I saw the injury report and I tweeted it the day before the opener and he was questionable. I was as surprised as anybody because that was my question on Friday that Zach gave that answer to. And, you know, he looked me right in the eye and said he feels great. And that, you know, the context he gave, which was even deeper, is that, you know, last season he would go into so many games going, okay, how's the knee feel today? Am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to do that? And he said that component is completely off the table. So that's some pretty deep context. And then, as you said, you know, all we heard throughout training camp was, you know, how strong he looked in practices and how healthy he was. And obviously he was rusty in the games, didn't play very well, but he was working his way back into game shape. You kind of just push that to the side and just assume once the bright lights flip on, he's going to be Zach Levine again. So I'm as surprised as anybody. And I think the biggest mixed messaging that was, you know, you detailed some of it. To me, the headline mixed messaging was that Billy Donovan said this is something they are, you know, fully expected to have to deal with throughout the season. And I mean, that's completely new. That's just not what we heard throughout training camp at all. So I would say that, and I put this in a mailbag that I posted at NBCSportsChicago.com. I would say maybe this is a blip, and in a month he's ramped up, he's in game shape, the knee feels fine, he's playing in back-to-backs. You know, it just was this initial little hiccup. That's best case scenario, but it's certainly, you know, a storyline that we're gonna have to monitor now moving forward.
And do you think that there is potentially something wrong that maybe they're not letting on to? I guess the thing that I'm confused about is they're being very vague about it. You know, like you would think like, oh, he's just experiencing some pain, some soreness, and he just kind of wants to get through it. And we already went through that with Lonzo Ball throughout the offseason. Not really a lot was said. And then all of a sudden you get Lonzo on media day, or I guess it was the day after media day, where he was talking about how he can't run or jump. It's like the guy can't even do basketball activities. Clearly, this is more serious than the front office was letting on. And maybe they didn't know about it to an extent. But do you kind of get that feeling too that maybe there is something a little more serious going on? They're just trying to maybe keep it under wraps so that way people like the media don't go freaking out about it.
Well, if that is the case, then that's new for them, and they're figuring that out as well because that has not come across my radar. And look, I always say like the minor surgery is the surgery that happens to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I was told from the jump this was a minor procedure and that it was successful. And you know, Zach, I think even put on his Instagram like a picture of him playing golf with Don Cheadle, the actor Don Cheadle, like 3 days after the surgery. I mean, it was a scope, okay? Yeah. So. But yes, I mean, this is two situations now following the Lonzo situation where you've got some surprise question marks. And, you know, Zach's knee history is his knee history. He tore an ACL. So, you know, I thought this was not going to be a storyline this season. And now we have to prepare ourselves for the fact that it could be. As I said before, maybe this is a blip. Maybe it's just that week of practices caused a little twinge or discomfort or whatever, you know. And again, we need to point out Zach did not say that. Billy said that.
Right.
So there is some, you know, mixed messaging here. But maybe this, you know, is gone in 2-3 weeks and he's playing back-to-backs, what have you. But yeah, I'm as surprised as anybody. I mean, that was not the message I got throughout the offseason or throughout training camp.
We were talking a little bit about Lonzo Ball. I did want to touch on him as well. Another player, like I said, in which we received kind of very vague information from the status of his injury throughout the offseason. I had Sam Smith on last week, and I asked him about his thoughts on Lonzo, specifically because he actually asked him a question when he had his media availability around, you know, hey, is there a chance that you could maybe miss the whole season? Sam said that he would be very surprised. This was just last week if Lonzo played at all this season. Now, Sam has been known for some pretty wild takes. I think we all know that. But what are your thoughts regarding Lonzo and whether he will, in fact, see time on the court this season?
I mean, I would just say this, other than the fact that, as we all know, that Sam is one of my closest friends. I would just say this. My reporting and what I've been told is that as of now, the mindset is he's going to try to play. Yeah. But I think the fact that, you know, he was going to be back in 6 to 8 weeks from the initial surgery and never came back. And then there was, you know, question marks around this procedure. And, et cetera, et cetera. It's completely open ended. So I'm not even gonna touch a prediction on this one. Sam said that same prediction to me, and Sam and I talk all the time in media rooms all over the country, et cetera. So he has said that same prediction to me. I have no idea what's going to happen. I just know I can assure you from direct reporting that he is as of right now, his mindset is he's going to try to play. When that is, if that happens, that I cannot say, but I don't think his mindset is to plan on sitting out the season. But man, if he doesn't come back till, let's say, January, that's a year out. I mean, that's a lot of time missed. So he's going to obviously be brought back slowly and conservatively. And now with the Zach situation on top of that, it's just not the best, start health wise for Bulls fans or the Bulls beat.
Does that change your prediction at all if Lonzo were to miss the whole season, as far as like what you were saying earlier, where you kind of see the Bulls finishing?
No, I wrote that, prediction the day of the season opener. So I knew exactly what I was working with. I think that, I think they're a solidly built team for the regular season because they have a lot of depth. And I think you saw that in that opening game. I thought Dragic came in and really flipped that script with his shooting. And look, he's not, he's 36. He's not going to come in and save the day every game. But I just think they've got enough depth and enough solid players that they're going to be a solid team in the East. But it's certainly the Lonzo and Zach situation certainly limits their ceiling. I mean, if those guys are both fully healthy and neither of them had been having knee situations, I think you are thinking championship contention window is open. But I don't have any designs on that. I don't think this is a team that is built for a long playoff run.
Did want to talk about the season opener. You were just mentioning that Miami Bulls did something we didn't see much of last season, and that was beating a top team in the league. Now, I mean, it's the first game of the season. We don't know if perhaps Miami will actually disappoint and show out to be an average team. When they Bulls swept the Lakers last season, we thought it was incredible. And then we realized, the Lakers maybe actually aren't that great. But on paper, this is a good Miami team. They were the number one seed in the East last year. And the Bulls came into this game a little sloppy to start it, but turned things around and then took care of business. What stood out to you most from the game?
Other than the fact that Bam Adebayo looked like he was on a take. And Kyle Lowry looks, yikes.
Shell of himself.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of levity. What stood out the most to me was this depth that we talked about. I just think it's a very serious-minded team that can go 10 deep. I actually can go deeper than that because I think if you threw Derek Jones Jr. or Dalen Terry in there, I think you'd have that same kind of tough-minded professional approach. So you're talking 12 deep, and obviously you're only going to play 9 or 10. And another big takeaway, and this isn't breaking news here, is I thought Dosunmu was just incredibly lights out. I mean, 2 turnovers in 36 minutes, solid shot making, good floor command, just really, really strong presence throughout the game. So, DeMar, I didn't mention him because you're just kind of used to it at this point. But, the fact that he knows he can replicate what he did last year, it looks like, when he needs to or wants to, or I shouldn't say wants to, but when he needs to, like, that's a good defense and a physical team. That's another probably small takeaway, but less so because I've seen that before. But Io running the floor or running the team with that kind of command, and then this depth, headlined by Dragic and Drummond, I think are the 2 big takeaways I had.
Yeah, I mean, you can see, is already making that year 2 leap. And it's great for him because it's not great for the Bulls because you don't want Lonzo Ball to be out, but this is going to even, accelerate his development even further, given the fact that he's going to be in that starting role, at least for the foreseeable future. Talking about someone else in regards to leaps, let's talk about Patrick Williams because it's been said over and over again. We don't need to reiterate it, but we will. The Bulls are really needing this kid to make that jump this season, right? Seeing that leap from him going into year 3, especially now that he's fully healthy. You have a lot of Bulls fans getting a little impatient, whether that's fair or not. That's just how some Bulls fans are. I personally think it's way too early to just give up on a player who's only 21 years old and basically missed his entire sophomore season. But I really do think, this is the year. If by the end of it, you don't see much progress from Patrick where you say he's probably not going to be that high level player that maybe we expected from him, especially for being a number 4 pick. And maybe at that point, we kind of just have to live with that. Some draft picks just don't pan out. It's why I always say the NBA draft is a crapshoot. What are your expectations of Patrick this season? And do you think this is kind of a make or break year for him?
Yeah, it's a hugely important year for him. Obviously, I mean, as you mentioned, it's his third year, and he'd be eligible for an extension next summer. I mean, that's separate from just what you need to see on the court. But my expectations are for him to have less periods of time where you forget he's on the court, and that's a pretty low bar. And it sounds harsh, but I mean, that's what stood out to me from the opener. There were still too many stretches where I didn't know he was on the court, and that just can't happen. I'm not focused on his scoring average. I'm not focused on his shot attempts, because if he is in that starting lineup, he's a differential guy by nature, and he's the 4th option right off the jump. So maybe even 5th option if Io's out there. So I'm less focused on that. And to me, Billy Donovan put it as plain as day on media day when he said, "I just need to see continued aggression from Patrick Williams," and that's running the floor hard in transition. That's cutting off the ball with force. That's setting hard screens. That's running plays with purpose so that you maybe drag a defender away from DeMar or Zach. I mean, there are ways to impact the game without scoring or taking shots, and you personally need to see more from that. I mean, to me, the most telling moment from his opening game was Billy Donovan putting Javonte Green in for him with 6 minutes to go. I mean, that kind of tells you all you need to know right there.
Yeah. I mean, the thing for me is I wonder if it's got to be a confidence thing, because I saw a much more confident Patrick Williams in his rookie season than I do now. And I think part of it also is the fact that the Bulls were just in a much different place. They're still, for all intents and purposes, more or less rebuilding that season in his rookie year. And I watched him on the court in that season opener. I said this in one of my videos recently. I made a conscious effort to watch him off of the ball because, as a fan, you're always kind of just seeing what's happening on the ball. And he just looked a little lost out there. And I don't know what it is, but I think that's what's sort of confusing to Bulls fans is it's like you saw this kid look really great in his rookie season, starting most of the year, was really good on defense. You could see that he had a lot of potential for only being a 19-year-old, and we just really haven't seen that much progress. I don't know what it is. Do you think that it maybe is a confidence factor? And now that the Bulls have completely shifted, their overall trajectory and where they're at with bringing in, veteran players, good players, do you think that has an impact on that?
Well, that's why I had no problem with what Billy tried in the preseason. And quite frankly, I was surprised that he went to Patrick back with the starters for the opener. And I would not think that that's a permanent look. I would think that if this continues, and obviously, as you mentioned, we're taping this on Friday night before the Wizards game. I mean, would I be surprised if Javonte Green's with the starters tonight and Patrick's coming off the bench? Absolutely not. Yeah. And here's why, because to your point, Jamal, it's like, as I mentioned before, when you play him with the starters, it almost kind of feeds into the worst aspects of his personalities, which are to be deferential, to, kind of just wait for his opportunities. When he played with that second unit, I know it was preseason, or even, the other obviously glaring example would be the regular season finale last year in Minnesota when nobody was playing and they're resting guy. He, like you said, he just looks like a completely different player. So I personally think moving him to the second unit for a spell, a stretch, what have you, might be the way to go. I thought that move by Billy in the preseason I was surprised by it because I didn't think Patrick would, be as docile to start this year as he kind of was. But once Billy did it, I was like, oh, I like that. That makes some sense. And I think you should go back to that. I don't usually get into coaching decisions or things like that because that's not what I'm good at. But I thought that was a good experiment, and I would not be surprised if the Bulls go back to that.
Well, and Javonte also played so well in the preseason. Didn't get a
really. He fits. Sorry to interrupt. He fits with that unit.
He does.
What I was talking about before: cutting off the ball, playing with purpose, running the floor hard in transition. You notice he's out there immediately, but it's not like he's taking shots away from Zach and DeMar. He's not like he's gunning the ball. He just is impacting that group in a positive way. So Now I'm really getting worked up about it. Do that tonight.
Well, we'll shift gears a little then. Wanted to talk about some guys who are in contract years. No extension for Coby, no extension for Vucevic, Javonte Green, Dosunmu, all going to be on expiring deals. All players, that are going to be looking to get paid. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Bulls. If again, the goal is to maintain continuity, which the front office continues to stress, some of these guys are probably going to get larger paydays than where they're at right now. I'm talking about most notably Ayo and Javonte. It's no secret Bulls ownership does not like paying the luxury tax. Thoughts from you on how you think all this is going to shake out going into next offseason, which I know it's way too early to even be talking about, but I had to ask, which players do you see coming back to this team after the end of the season?
No, it's a great question, and yeah, it is probably a little too early for speculation. But I do have some opinions on that, and I put this in my mailbag is because somebody asked me about Ayo. I'll just say this: like I know just from conversations I've had that re-signing him is obviously a huge priority, and I would be shocked if he is elsewhere next season. I mean, the Bulls know what they found in him; they know what they have in him. They know they value him highly. So of the ones you ran down, I would put him clearly at the top of the list by a wide margin in terms of offseason signing priorities. The Javonte one is actually one I hadn't really thought of, and it's an interesting point because, he's obviously played himself into a nice role here, but maybe he goes to a different team and gets a bigger role and a bigger payday. So that's one I hadn't really thought about. Yeah, I would say as far as the books, that's going to come down to how they perform this season because Michael Reinsdorf is on record publicly as saying that he's willing to pay the tax for a championship contending team. Right now, this team does not look like a championship contending team to me. If they catch lightning in a bottle or outperform this season, and that window appears to be opening, then that calculus changes. So you can't really answer the other questions until you see how this season plays out. I mean, you could flip the question on its head and say, what if things go south in a hurry? And then in February, they're dealing some of these guys for assets. That's certainly a possibility as well. So you clearly have to see how the season plays out. I would say to me, from my seat behind Ayo, Vooch would probably be the highest priority. But the difference between those situations, I guess I would be unrestricted as well. But no, I was restricted. So, but Vooch would be unrestricted, so he would have a say in that situation. So that's something to monitor as the season goes on as well.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually you that Michael Reinsdorf said that too, right? It was a Bulls Talk podcast where he was talking about, I'm willing to pay the luxury tax for a championship contending team. I'm actually just curious, just your general thoughts on that. Because you see a lot of teams in the NBA paying the luxury tax, and at least in my view, and maybe they view it differently, they're not championship contending teams. Do you think there is something to be said about still paying up money to have a good team to where other free agents, other players around the league are saying, hey, these guys are doing something. Maybe I want to go play there, especially it's Chicago. It's a big market, so you already have that advantage. And what are your thoughts on that? Because I don't really buy the whole mentality of, I'm willing to go into the luxury tax if we have a championship contender. I understand if you're completely rebuilding, but if you have a good team that's going to be fun to watch for the fans, I just think it makes sense because you don't just want to let me just kind of go right below the line like they have been doing until we get to a championship contender. Otherwise, you may never get there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that obviously I've been covering this franchise a long time, and I'll just tell you that that's just not how this franchise does business. I mean, they paid the luxury tax one time in franchise history. They're on target to do so a second time the year Derrick Rose tore his meniscus. And what did they do when that happened? They pivoted and shockingly traded Luol Deng to the Cleveland Cavaliers to exit the luxury tax.
Right.
A move that was felt so strongly throughout the organization that Joakim Noah didn't talk to the media for a week, which was completely unlike him. And Tom Thibodeau's Cold War with the coaching staff and front office was only intensified because he was blindsided by that trade as well. So that's the history, man. And, it's funny because, Michael was generous with his time and gave me that interview on the Bulls Talk podcast and said that publicly. And I think the expectation was, because when he did give that interview, the Bulls were leading the East, that would then going to, blanket statement apply this offseason, and the Bulls would just go willy-nilly and spend whatever they want. Well, I mean, they faded the 6th seed, first round exit. That's not a championship contending window. So it didn't surprise me at all the way the Bulls operated this offseason. I get, obviously a big part of my job is to have a pulse on the fan base. So, and I've spent on as much time on Twitter as anybody else. So I know the frustration. I know the reaction, all that stuff. I can just tell you, the history is the history. The Reinsdorfs have paid this ownership group has paid the luxury tax, one time in franchise history, and it's not changing unless they feel like they have a chance to go for a championship.
I'll get you out of here on this one, Casey, because I know we got the game coming up in a few hours. Who is the player that this season is the most important for, whether, be financial implications, just overall development, pressure, from fans, whoever it might be? I feel like I might know the answer because we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious which player of everyone on the roster you think is going to be the most important for the season.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, but I would probably center on Patrick Williams just because of what he represents. Because, I mean, we can get into the weeds and maybe draw some larger context, which has been stated before, but I think it's important to reiterate it. Is, to me, he's symbolic also, not only because get away from the 4th overall pick. It's that historically is not going to be viewed as a very strong draft, obviously.
Yeah.
But to me, what he represents is, he's instrumental in the philosophical approach that this management regime is taking. And that is, they've obviously got this, they paid a lot of money for this veteran core in DeRozan, Vucevic, and now these margin guy, and then Zach, to me, now that you've maxed him, is the bridge piece because he's 27 to that younger stable of the Ios, the Patrick Williams. Lonzo Ball was supposed to be in that calculus. Unfortunately, he's had some knee issues, but he's young, 24. So Patrick Williams is like supposed to be the reinforcement that's going to tie with Levine as the DeRozans and the Vucevic's go wherever they go in the coming years. So, as a quick aside, because it's just in my brain, I do personally think DeRozan has the kind of game that's going to age very gracefully. I would not be surprised if he's here for another contract, but that's a topic for another podcast. But yeah, so for all those reasons, Patrick to me is by far the most important. And then just also the symbolism of him being this regime's first personnel move. So there's a lot on his plate, and he needs to start producing.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's got to be Patrick as well. Just everything that we talked about before, the expectations surrounding him, the fact that this is a big year for him going into his 3rd year, and also just the fact that the Bulls really need him, right? It's like,
for sure,
if he steps up in a big way and has a breakout season, that's huge for the Bulls compared to where they were last year. I do think Zach Levine, though, has some pressure on him as well, because he's got that max contract now. You're already hearing some Bulls fans, based on the fact that he's missed even just these first 2 games, which is kind of over the top that people are saying that, but it's like, yeah, we paid this guy big money, and what's going on? He's sitting out because of left knee management. Does he actually want to play? It's like, people were hard on Derrick Rose back in the day when it was speculated, oh, maybe he doesn't really want to play, even though he's been cleared to play, and he was a Chicago native, he was a Chicago owned, beloved by the fans. So Bulls fans are always pretty harsh on their players sometimes, which, we got to take a step back and realize it's not that serious. But I do think that there's going to be pressure on Zach as well, just because he's on a max contract, and that comes with expectations. But anyway, Casey, as always, I truly appreciate you making the time to meet with me. It's always great to hear your thoughts as an insider in the organization and a longtime beat writer. Keep up the great work this season at NBC Sports Chicago. I'll leave a link down to your mailbag. I haven't actually had a chance to take a look at it. I saw you tweet about that. I'll leave a link to that in the description for anybody who wants to take a look at that. And yeah, Casey, we'll be following along the way this season.
All right. I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks for having me on.
Of course.